I discovered that I am not the father of my 14-year-old son, and my wife wants to have a happy family with the biological father, but in court, my son speaks, and my wife is desperate. This is a bit of an emergency, so I'll get straight to the point. I am 40 years old and had been married to my soon-to-be ex-wife, Megan, who is 38, for almost 12 years. We have a 14-year-old son together, Johnny, or at least I thought he was my son all these years. Megan and I met at work and had only been dating for a year when she found out she was pregnant. I was a bit skeptical about having a baby so soon in our relationship, but she wanted to go ahead with the pregnancy. So I decided to support her, and we moved in together after finding out about the pregnancy. When Johnny was born, it never even crossed my mind to do a paternity test because Megan and I were in love, and by then, I was sure Johnny was my son. I felt very connected to him, and he even looked like me because we both had dark hair and eyes, so I literally had no reason to suspect anything. However, a few months ago, I found out that he is not actually my biological son, and Megan had been cheating on me this whole time. About 3 months ago, she confessed to me that she had been having an affair with her high school sweetheart Nathan for the past few months. Even at the beginning of our relationship, she had hooked up with him while we were together, and she never told me because she then got pregnant. One of the main reasons she and Nathan had to break up after high school was because he wasn't very serious about his life and had decided not to go to college. Back then, he was still living with his parents and jumping from one job to another every couple of months. She thought she needed stability in her life, so she chose to be with me because I was very career-oriented. She said that by deciding to stay with me, she was betting on the right horse. But now, she had realized that money wasn't everything, and she was in love with Nathan, so she wanted to build a life with him. Besides, he had had enough time to change, and now he owned his own business, so she didn't really have to worry about money. When she confessed everything to me, she told me that she had done a paternity test and had known Johnny wasn't my son from the beginning. But she chose to stay silent because I seemed so happy to be a father, and she didn't want to ruin our relationship by talking about her past. She also made Nathan promise never to mention this affair they had because she didn't want to risk our relationship, and for her happiness, he stayed away. However, they met again at a high school reunion almost 6 months before she finally told me the truth, and they rekindled their relationship once again. Since he was well established and still in love with her, and she realized that she was still in love with him too, she had to leave. It was a horrible time for me because I had been with this woman for so long. I had built a life with her, and still, they were doing this to me as if I meant nothing to her. Anyway, after telling me the truth, she left the house with all her things, but Johnny continued living with me because he didn't want to go with her. She hadn't even consulted me before telling him the truth, and he already knew everything before I got home from work. So we ended up consoling each other while we cried because our lives had been completely turned upside down. I knew that no matter what happened with the divorce, I was going to make sure I got joint custody of Johnny because regardless of his biological paternity, he was fully my son. I had raised him, and no one could take that away from me. Not Nathan, not even Megan. I talked to my lawyer and filed for divorce hours after discovering the truth, and the terms of my divorce filing were pretty simple and fair. I would keep everything we had, and she shouldn't expect alimony, even though she had been a housewife for the last 14 years since she left her job after Johnny was born. Despite all my support, she had cheated on me. She had been using me for money all the years we were together, and I wasn't going to let that continue any longer. Of course, she didn't agree with that and contested the divorce terms, demanding alimony and a large amount of compensation. I was ready to fight for that. I didn't care. But she made things worse by applying for full custody 3 weeks ago, because apparently she and Nathan were planning to move to another city to open a branch of his business there too, and they wanted to take Johnny with them. I would be given visitation rights, but she demanded full custody, because now things were finally working out for them to be a happy family with Nathan, just because it was convenient for her. There was no way I would let that happen, and since we couldn't resolve it in mediation, this matter ended up going to family court. I was pretty sure this would be a piece of cake for me, but she and Nathan started lying blatantly about what kind of person I was. I had to work very hard to prove otherwise, which has complicated everything, even though Johnny himself has said that he would like to stay here with me since he has grown up here. They are doing everything possible to make it seem like Johnny is confused and that I am the one manipulating him. They think I am too much of a workaholic to be able to take care of him by myself and that it would be better for him to live with his mother. There is also the fact that I am not actually his biological father, which makes everything take twice as long to resolve. Since the divorce proceedings started and Megan moved out, we reached an informal agreement on how we would share time with Johnny. So far, we had an agreement where he would spend the first 4 days of the week with Nathan and Megan and come with me on the weekends. I thought this would be the agreement we would stick to even after the divorce, but they made it much more complicated than necessary by deciding to move to another city and applying for full custody out of the blue. So we have been stuck in a custody battle for the past few weeks. When we were in family court the other day, Johnny said something that caused a big stir. This was the first time he was actively involved in the court proceedings, and at one point he said that so far he had wanted to stay here with me and that he was still going to stick with that decision. Not only because his life was here, but also because he had overheard Megan and Nathan talking on the phone with their lawyer the night before. He had heard them discussing how they would portray me as the villain, and they had made up a bunch of lies that he started to mention, much worse than the ones they had made up before. Before this, they had only claimed that I was too much of a workaholic and didn't have enough time for Johnny, that I brought work home with me, and that most of the time I was at home. I locked myself in my room and was always busy with work stuff, even on weekends. They also claimed that I hardly ever cared about how Johnny was doing in school, and that I hadn't attended a single parent-teacher meeting since he was born, leaving all of that to my wife because I found it boring and never showed interest in his life. These things were easy to disprove, but apparently Johnny had overheard them planning to escalate the accusations and really make it seem like I was abusing him, saying that I hit him and yelled at him for the slightest mistake. Apparently Johnny was scared to talk about it in court in front of me, and maybe that way they could get temporary protective custody of him and eventually manage to turn him against me, which would make things easier for them. That's why he wanted to get ahead and clarify himself that I had never abused him and that, if anything, it was Megan and Nathan who were mistreating him by involving him in this custody battle and using him as a pawn, just to get back at me for my divorce petition, leaving Megan with absolutely nothing. Even though my petition was fair, since she had never earned anything for herself and had the audacity to cheat on me despite relying heavily on me, she thought she deserved the alimony and compensation she was demanding, and planned to use Johnny's custody as leverage against me to reach a settlement in the divorce. Over the phone, Johnny had heard Megan say that once they got the divorce money, she would invest in Nathan's business and take it to new heights. They had been practically overflowing with joy while discussing this, so volume was probably the last thing on their mind. Unfortunately, they forgot to consider the fact that at that moment Johnny was with them and hadn't yet returned to me. So they had been quite loud, and he was standing right outside the door and had heard everything. After Johnny exposed Megan and Nathan, no one knew what to do, and the meeting had to be suspended because our lawyers got a bit loud and we ended up having to leave early. I was quite pleased because after Johnny spoke, I turned to look at Megan, and she literally had her head in her hands and was pulling her hair so hard I thought she would rip it out. This simply meant that all of this was true and she was in trouble. I was pleased with how the situation had turned out, and instead of going back home with Megan, Johnny decided to come to me and we went home together. But Megan was furious. She stopped us just as we were about to get in our car. She grabbed Johnny by the arm and started shaking him, demanding an explanation as to why he had done such a thing in court and ruined their chances of living with her and Nathan. When I saw her shaking him, I lost my patience. I walked up to her, stood between them, and pushed her back so she couldn't touch him. Fortunately, my lawyer caught all of this on camera, and we will definitely use it in our next session. I told her to back off and said it was her own fault for being such a despicable person. I was glad Johnny had taken my side because he wasn't a spineless monster, spoiled and greedy like her. I was already quite angry about how she was treating Johnny, especially after what I discovered in court. I wasn't in the mood to allow this to continue. Nathan came to her rescue and started yelling at both of us, mostly about all she had done for our family. And now we couldn't even let her have a real chance to be happy with him. I had no interest in talking to that guy, so I rolled my eyes and started getting into the car. But then Megan kept holding on to Johnny's arm and said she wasn't going to let him go back home with me because I was brainwashing him against his own mother. She told me that so far she had only been fighting for full custody to take Johnny with her and Nathan when they moved. But now she would make sure I didn't even get visitation rights. Bold words from someone who had just been exposed as a liar, and who had planned to lie in court to get her dirty hands on money she didn't deserve. I told her to let go of Johnny or I would call the police, and she said she was his mother and had the right to dictate where he went. Even Johnny kept trying to break free, but she held on tightly and kept insisting she wouldn't let him go home with me. At one point, things got a bit heated. Johnny is quite sturdy and robust even though he's only 14. Megan, on the other hand, is small and not very strong. So Johnny did the only thing he could. He pushed her really hard to free himself, got into the car and locked the door. After he pushed her, she started screaming at the top of her lungs that I was encouraging her son to attack her and that she wasn't going to allow this to happen. I thought it was unfair to say that because he hadn't attacked her, he had simply tried to free himself. In the process, she might have been pushed a bit and could have fallen, but Nathan was there to catch her, so nothing serious happened, right? Well, apparently not, because she and Nathan kept standing in front of our car, saying she would make sure I lost custody of him. If I was encouraging him to be violent towards others just because things weren't going my way, then I was definitely unfit to be a parent. It wasn't until I honked the horn for so long, and it ran out of sound, that they finally moved aside and let us go home. It's been a couple of days since then, and I still wonder if it was the right thing not to scold Johnny for pushing his mother. He seems completely unaware of everything, but I'm in a dilemma now because that day he definitely pushed Megan quite hard, and he is very strong. I don't want him to repeat this kind of behavior with anyone else, but under those circumstances, I feel he was justified in doing what he did. Anyway, I'm confused about whether Megan was right or not because Johnny has had issues with violence in the past. So, was I the bad guy for not scolding my son for pushing his mother? Update 1. Some of you asked why I mentioned that Johnny has had issues with violence in the past. That's because a few months ago he was having bullying problems at school. He hadn't told us about it, but one day we got a phone call from the principal's office saying that Johnny had gotten into a fight and had been injured. The boy he punched in the face was even more hurt. Apparently, this boy had been bullying Johnny for several weeks. Johnny initially ignored him, but then the bully crossed the line by insulting our family. Johnny didn't like that. He told the boy to stop a couple of times, but when he didn't and even tried to vandalize his locker with insults, Johnny simply snapped and hit him. So, there was a fight in the hallway. Obviously, I told Johnny that violence is never the answer because I don't want him getting into fights or getting into trouble. But in a way, I felt proud of him for standing up for himself. I guess Johnny has never been violent unless the situation called for it, and I think that's a good thing. Even in this situation with his mother, he was just trying to free himself. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Megan misinterpreted the situation and is trying to use that against us. But I won't doubt myself. It's been a week since the incident, and tomorrow we have to meet again. First, we will meet with our lawyers to settle the divorce, and then we will meet in court for Johnny's custody. After the revelation during our session, I highly doubt they have any chance. Tomorrow could be the day we finally close this chapter and decide what to do. Anyway, my lawyer and I have gathered all the evidence we could to prove that I am a good father, and we are looking forward to winning this. More importantly, Johnny's words will count the most. He has made it very clear that he doesn't want to live with his mom. It's not just because he doesn't want to move. It's because she is a terrible person, just like Nathan. They will never be able to raise him properly, and we definitely don't need another person like them. I was talking to Johnny a few hours ago, and he told me he was very nervous because this will be the first time he sees his mother after he pushed her to free himself. He knew she was very upset about that. He confessed to me that he is trying very hard not to worry about what she thinks, but in the end, she is his biological mother. We have spent so many years together as a family that it's hard to accept the truth now. He told me he really feared what would happen if by some chance he ended up being given to Megan and Nathan. I assured him that this was not going to happen. I would go to any court in the world to make sure it didn't happen and he could stay with me. He is my son. Nobody cares about a stupid paternity test. If I say he is my son, then he is my son. That seemed to make him feel a bit better, but I can tell the whole situation has affected him. I don't even know how I'm going to deal with the situation if I end up having custody of him. How do we recover from that? Because eventually his mother will leave town and move in with Nathan. I'm pretty sure that after everything that has happened, she won't be willing to see Johnny again if she doesn't get custody of him. She's just that kind of person. I don't want him to lose his relationship with his mother because I don't want him to resent me in the future. Anyway, we're leaving and maybe tomorrow won't be the final day of this case, but for my sake and Johnny's, we hope it really will be. Update 2. Hi, something very strange just happened. It's almost 4 in the morning and I was asleep, but about an hour ago someone rang the doorbell. When I went to open it, there was no one outside, just a brown envelope left at the door. I even checked the security cameras, but the person who left it was dressed entirely in black with the hood up, so I couldn't identify them. However, they were taller than 5 feet 2, so it couldn't have been Megan, and they seemed to be either quite stocky or wearing a very bulky sweatshirt. Either way, I don't think it was Nathan either, and they are the only two possible options. What I found inside the brown envelope surprised me a lot. It was the results of a paternity test, and surprisingly, they were positive. The results were from the same lab where we had the test done a few months ago when Megan told me Johnny was not biologically my son. She had shown me results that said Johnny and I were not a match. I took the test 3 times just to make sure it was true, and all 3 times the results were the same. Finally, I had accepted the truth, but the results I just received say that Johnny and I are a match. So now I'm very confused. I don't know which results are false and which are real. To be honest, it was very hard for me to believe that Johnny was not my son because we look a lot alike, and I never felt like he wasn't my son. Whoever sent me these results is trying to confuse me a day before we meet to decide custody. Or maybe there is something I have overlooked all this time. Maybe Megan and Nathan committed paternity fraud or something like that. I just called the lab, but obviously they didn't answer because they're probably not even open yet. However, the first thing I'll do tomorrow is go check in person because this is really confusing and I have no idea what to do right now. However, I've already spoken to my lawyer about it and we're going to figure something out tomorrow. First, we need to make sure these results are real, so I'll take the test again, but this time I won't tell Megan about it. I don't know why, but I have a persistent feeling that I will definitely get answers tomorrow if I confront Megan with these results. Update 3. Today was a very long day. First, I went to the lab with Johnny and my lawyer to ask about the results I received last night. Before I could ask anyone about it, this guy who seemed to be in charge pulled us aside and told us it was him. Last night, he had delivered the envelope to me, but he didn't expect me to come. He explained that the first time we took the test, Megan and Nathan had already talked to him after researching and finding out which lab the court used. They had an agreement for him to change the results and show them as negative, so she could claim Johnny was not my son and try to take him with her. Apparently, she assumed that once I found out Johnny wasn't my biological son, I would give up being his father and leave them alone. However, when that didn't happen after I saw the test results the first time and came back for 2 more tests, she told this guy to help her and falsify the results 2 more times. All of this was done behind our backs, and she promised him that she would eventually make him a partner in the business once she got the money from our settlement. He had hoped for that, which is why he helped her 2 more times by falsifying the paternity test results on all occasions. I was stunned when I found this out because I never thought she would be capable of doing something like this. Anyway, he recently changed his mind because he had been in contact with Megan all this time, and he had heard what happened in family court the last time we met. As she had to tell him that these things were taking longer than she expected, and they wouldn't be able to start their business for another couple of months, so he would have to wait. He decided he could no longer continue helping her because it was clearly very immoral and unethical. So, he decided to deliver that document to me last night. He apologized for all the trouble he caused and practically begged me not to involve him in any of this because he really wanted to remain anonymous. I was upset because this guy, who didn't even know me, had wronged me a few months ago just for money, and I really wanted to report him. But that would only mean more trouble for me, and I didn't have the energy for that. Maybe if he repeats this kind of behavior, someone else will report him, but until then, I'm out. Besides, I already had the documents I needed to prove my paternity, so I didn't care what happened to him. If it came to that and I had to prove something in court, I would definitely use it as evidence and report him. However, for now, I had another plan in mind. After that, I went to court, but before sitting down for our scheduled divorce settlement meeting, I took Megan aside. She was quite surprised by this move. I told her that I received this document last night and that they were the real results of the paternity test. So she immediately understood that I knew about the fraud she had committed. At first, she tried to act innocent, but I told her that paternity fraud is a serious matter and that I would give her a chance to get out of this without more trouble. If she accepted my petition's conditions this time and also relinquished her parental rights over Johnny, she agreed to the first part, but the second part didn't sit well with her and she tried to negotiate with me, saying that she was his mother and couldn't just let him go. However, I didn't believe any of that, and I told her that no mother in the world would do something like that to her own child. So, now she could do what I was asking or face a lot of trouble. After arguing with me for almost 10 minutes, she finally agreed, and I felt like I had won. After that, I finally managed to reach an agreement, and my lawyer and I were delighted because she had accepted the petition's terms. After that, we just had to wait for our final confrontation in family court, and there, things went exactly as planned. She wasn't happy about it, but she agreed to terminate her parental rights over Johnny and leave. That took everyone by surprise because she had been fighting tooth and nail for his custody for the past few weeks, and suddenly she gave up. So, that seemed a bit strange, but I didn't care. I had had one. Johnny, my lawyer, and I finally parted ways, and we went to our respective homes a few hours ago. In a few days, my lawyer will have drafted the documents, and she will have finally relinquished her rights. Then, it will just be my son and me against the world, although I think it has been that way for the past few months. But I just can't wait for all this to be officially over, and finally try to move on with my life because all this has been very intense. However, for now, Johnny is extremely happy with the situation, and so am I, so we're just trying to make the most of it. Update 4. It has been a little over 4.5 months since the last update, and I am now fully divorced and living with my son. Something that has been extremely good for us because we've gotten rid of the toxicity of my ex-wife. Even Johnny is happy not to have to see her because he had started to resent her for what she did. Johnny recently turned 15, and although many people congratulated him and attended his birthday, his mother didn't even bother to send him a text message. That shows she never really cared for him. Anyway, I didn't reopen my account just to tell you that, but to update you on my ex-wife's situation and also to answer some questions. One that I saw was asked a lot last time and I left unanswered. The majority had to do with taking legal action against the lab employee and also against my ex. But as I already explained, and that's why I didn't answer, I was tired of so many legal processes. I just wanted a quick way out of all this and I took it. Some would have expected revenge and such, but the truth is that being dragged through court for months is not pleasant. So, the best thing was to end it and return to my normal life, even for Johnny, who was also being affected by all this. In the end, I'm a firm believer that karma catches up with everyone anyway, so sooner or later my wife will get her punishment, just like everyone who wronged me. Although this update is also somewhat about that, because my ex has received some divine punishment, if you will. Nathan finally decided to cut her off from everything, because after they couldn't get money from me, which would have helped them open a new store, he didn't want to share his business with her. It's quite poetic because she didn't want to be with him when he was a nobody, and now he didn't want to be with her when he got established. So now my ex-wife has had to look for a job, something she was not very used to. Not only did she lose a husband and a child, but also her lifestyle. But that's what happens when you do wrong in life, at least in this case. And if you're wondering how I know this, no, I haven't spoken to her again or anything like that. We just have people in common who have been able to tell me all this. Fortunately, she hasn't shown up at my door or tried to contact us, and since it's been a while now, I don't think she will either.